$7 trillion. 7 with 12 zeros. This is what the United States government plans to spend this year. Well, it's actually 7.4 trillion to be precise. Whatever the exact number is, one thing is certain, they have a lot of money. By that I mean a lot. To put that into perspective, if you had that much money and you spent $1 million every day, it'll take you 20,000 years to completely run out of $7.4 trillion. That's how unfathomable that amount is. And yet, most people have no idea where that money actually goes. So, 7.4 trillion is what they have for this year. Well, not really. They only have about 5.5 trillion in their account. Here. Also called the US Treasury. So, a question every logical person might have. Where are they getting the remaining 1.9 trillion from? I'll tell you in just a minute, but for now, let's just go with 7.4 trillion. You know, what's even more surprising is how quickly that number has grown. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, on average, the United States government was spending roughly around $4 to $5 trillion a year. In just a few years, annual spending crossed the $7 trillion mark. A lot of that jump came from emergency pandemic spending. Okay, now back to where are they getting the remaining 1.9 trillion from? Well, to get that, they're gonna issue the bonds. Not that bond. Yes, this one. In simple words, they are gonna borrow that money. And they do that by selling these bonds to other countries and the Federal Reserve. And to you as well. Yes, you. You can also give the US government a loan by buying these bonds if you got some money. So that's how the US government will get that remaining $1.9 trillion from. And over time, that borrowing has accumulated into a national debt of more than $39 trillion. That's $114,000 for every single person in America. But we're talking only about the deficit of 1.9 trillion. What about the money they actually have in the Treasury? Where did that come from? The answer is taxes. Lots of taxes. The biggest source is the federal income tax. Taxes that you pay on your salaries, investments, and other income. Roughly half of all federal revenue comes from this single source. The second largest source is payroll taxes. These are the deductions that come directly out of workers' paychecks to fund Social Security and Medicare. Together, payroll taxes account for about 1/3 of federal revenue. Then come corporate taxes paid by the companies on the profits they make. After that, there are dozens of smaller revenue streams, which accounts for less than 10% of the federal revenue. Those are taxes on gasoline, cigarettes and alcohol, imported goods, estate taxes, etc. Individually, many of these are small, but together, they add up to hundreds of billions of dollars. What's interesting is that the government didn't always collect money this way. In fact, for much of American history, there wasn't even an income tax at all. From 1790s up until 1913, 90% of all federal revenue came from tariffs on imports and excise taxes on liquor, beer, wine, and tobacco. After 1913 is when the government started collecting income tax, which raises another question. How much do we pay? How much does the average American pay in taxes annually? The answer depends on income. The US tax system is progressive. People who earn more generally pay a larger percentage of their income in taxes. A middle-income American household earns roughly around $60,000 per year. When federal, state, and local taxes are combined, that household might pay around $18,000 annually. At first glance, that sounds like a lot, and for many families, it is. But taxes are only one side of the equation. The other side is what people get back. Many Americans receive benefits, directly or indirectly through government programs, like Social Security, Medicare and Medicaid, public schools, fire department, police, and national defense. This one is important. Keep this in mind. It'll come later in the video. But compared with other developed countries, Americans actually pay relatively low taxes. Across all levels of government, taxes account for roughly 27% of America's economy. The average among wealthy nations is closer to 34%. Countries like France, Denmark, and Sweden collect significantly more. In return, they often provide broader healthcare, childcare, and social programs. The United States generally takes a different approach. They have lower taxes, small social programs, and a greater reliance on private spending. But was it always like this? No, not even close. As we previously know, for most of the American history, there was no federal income tax at all. In fact, for decades, taxes on alcohol and tobacco provided the overwhelming majority of federal revenue, which changed in 1913. The 16th Amendment gave Congress the power to levy a federal income tax. Initially, the rates were low, but wars changed everything. During World War I, tax rates jumped to almost 77%, but mostly rich people paid this amount. Most people still paid little or nothing at all. Then, during World War II, tax rate rose to an all-time high in the US history, up to 94%. But again, only the rich paid that amount. But still, it reflected a very different philosophy. The government needed an enormous amount of money to finance a global war. After the war, tax rates remained relatively high for decades. In 1980s, with President Reagan in the office, major tax reforms reduced the top federal rate from 50% to 28%. Since then, rates have fluctuated but never returned anywhere near their wartime peaks. But one thing that didn't fluctuate with tax rates is the government spending. Instead, it's constantly increasing, and most of it is being spent on absolutely weird and wasteful things. Which leads us to perhaps the biggest question of all. Where does the money actually go? To understand this, the United States government has categorized their expenditures into 3 categories. The first is mandatory spending. Mandatory spending is exactly what it sounds like. All the things that the government is legally required to fund. This includes Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, veterans benefits, and various other programs. Today, roughly 60% of the federal budget falls into this category. The second category is discretionary spending. This is the portion Congress debates every year. This includes all the major things like education, law enforcement, transportation, scientific research, foreign aid, and defense. Together, discretionary programs account for roughly a quarter of federal spending. Then comes the third category, interest on the debt. This is money spent simply to service previous borrowings. It's the cost of borrowing trillions of dollars over many decades, and that cost keeps growing. In fact, this is one of the fastest growing categories. But if we look back at the discretionary spending, one category stands above the rest, which is military. United States spends 50% of all the discretionary budget on its military, more than any other country in the world. In fact, if we combine the next 6 countries with the biggest military budgets, United States still spends more. It clearly shows what their priorities are. I mean, all the major wars are over. The Iraq War is over, the war in Afghanistan has concluded, but the military spending is still growing rapidly. Instead, in the Big Beautiful Bill Act, they have demanded Congress to increase the military spending up to $1 trillion, which will come at the cost of budget cuts for other programs like Medicaid and student loan programs. Critics argue that spending has grown far beyond what is necessary, and that some of those resources could be redirected toward domestic priorities. Regardless of where you stand politically, one thing is undeniable. Defense represents one of the largest and most influential pieces of the federal budget. But after hearing all these numbers, another question naturally emerges. Does all this money actually go where it's supposed to? The sad answer is no, not always. Because whenever trillions of dollars are moving through thousands of programs, mistakes, fraud, and corruption become almost inevitable. Every year, government watchdogs identify hundreds of billions of dollars in improper payments and corruption. One of the most dramatic examples occurred during the COVID-19 pandemic. To prevent economic collapse, the government rushed enormous relief programs into operation. The speed helped millions of people, but it also created opportunities for abuse. Investigators later estimated that up to $200 billion in pandemic relief loans may have been fraudulent. Then there are corruption cases. Connecticut state official Costa Diamantis, who was in charge of Connecticut's school construction program. He was convicted after prosecutors showed that he accepted cash bribes and favors from contractors in exchange for helping them win taxpayer-funded projects. Even the Pentagon, which receives hundreds of billions annually, is legally required to file an audit of its assets since 1990s. But the Department of Defense only began attempting them since 2017. Ever since, they have failed every single audit and have never filed any. And apart from the Pentagon, nobody has any idea. Where did all of that money go? These are all the reported cases. Imagine the ones that are not reported yet, and the ones that will never get reported because the people committing them are simply too powerful. There could be hundreds, if not thousands of people like Costa, who are taking advantage of the taxpayer money for their personal gain. A government that knows exactly how much you owe in taxes, down to the last dollar, but when it comes to where that money actually goes, suddenly nobody knows anything. The next time a politician tells you taxes need to go up, maybe ask them to explain where the last batch went first.